The heavy oak dining table groaned under the weight of a feast that I did not pay for, but somehow still belonged to me. The scent of seared ribeye steak filled the humid Houston air, mingling with the expensive cloying perfume that Brenda wore like armor. She sat at the head of the table, her neck draped in pearls that my brother Isaiah had likely financed with his blood and sweat. Andre sat across from her, his custom-tailored suit straining against his soft shoulders, chewing his meat with the loud, smacking satisfaction of a man who believed he owned the world. I stood in the corner of the dining room, my shoulders slumped, wearing the stained, oversized clothes of a broken man. I was not Isaiah, but to them I was just the same pathetic, invisible old fool they had been bleeding dry for years. "Bring the wine," Brenda snapped, her voice cutting through the clinking of fine crystal. She did not look at me because looking at me would require acknowledging that I was a human being. I shuffled forward, keeping my head down, dragging my feet against the polished hardwood floor. I reached out with a trembling hand, grasping the neck of the expensive Cabernet, pouring the dark red liquid into her glass. She snatched the glass away before I was even finished, spilling a drop on the pristine white tablecloth. "Look what you did, you clumsy old idiot," she hissed, her eyes narrowing with pure, unadulterated disgust. Andre laughed, a wet, ugly sound that echoed in the cavernous room. "Leave him alone, Brenda," Andre said, pointing his fork at my chest. "The old man is just hungry. Look at him, he's practically drooling over my plate." Andre carved a massive, bloody piece of steak, holding it up to the chandelier light, letting the juices drip onto his porcelain plate. "You want a bite, old man?" Andre asked, his smile twisting into a cruel sneer. I did not answer, keeping my gaze fixed on the floorboards, memorizing the grain of the wood, calculating the exact amount of force it would take to break his jaw. But I was not here for blood, not yet. I was here for justice, and justice required patience. When I did not respond, Andre sighed, shaking his head in mock pity. "I guess you are too proud for handouts," Andre said, dropping the prime cut of meat into a small plastic bowl sitting near his feet. It was a dog bowl, cracked and dirty, though they did not own a dog. The bowl was reserved for Isaiah, a daily reminder of his place in this house. Andre kicked the bowl across the floor. It skittered over the polished wood, stopping inches from my worn-out shoes. "Eat it, old man," Andre commanded, leaning back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "You are lucky we even let you stay inside, so get on your knees and eat your dinner." The room went dead silent, the heavy Houston humidity pressing against the glass windows, trapping the tension inside. Brenda took a slow sip of her wine, watching me with cold reptilian eyes. She wanted to see me break. She wanted to see me crawl, just like my brother had crawled for years. I looked down at the cold, greasy scraps in the plastic bowl. I felt the heat rising in my chest, a cold, calculated fury that had kept me alive in war zones, but I forced my breathing to slow. I bent down my knees, popping, picking up the bowl with trembling fingers. "Thank you, Andre." I whispered, my voice rough and hollow, perfectly mimicking the defeated tone of my twin. Andre laughed again, raising his glass in a mock toast. "Good boy, Isaiah," Andre chuckled, turning his attention back to his feast. I stood up, holding the plastic bowl, feeling the weight of their disrespect settling into my bones. Every insult, every sneer, every piece of cold meat was just another nail in their coffins. They thought they were the predators feasting on a weak, senile old man. They had no idea that they had just invited a wolf to their dinner table and the real slaughter was about to begin. I took a slow, deliberate step back into the shadows of the dining room, clutching the humiliating bowl to my chest. I watched them eat, committing every detail of their gluttony to memory. Kendra. My supposed daughter finally looked up from her glowing smartphone screen. She rolled her eyes, her face a mask of supreme annoyance, as if my mere presence was an insult to her expensive tastes. "Why is he still standing there?" Kendra whined, stabbing a piece of asparagus with her silver fork. He smells like mildew and old dirt, and it is completely ruining my appetite. Brenda waved a dismissive hand, not even bothering to turn her head. Just ignore him. Kendra. Brenda sighed, taking another long drink of her wine. He's going back down to the basement as soon as we are done, I promise. I stood perfectly still, letting their hateful words wash over me, feeling nothing but a cold, hard resolve. I'd spent my entire life building empires, crushing ruthless businessmen, and surviving environments that would make these spoiled brats weep in terror. Yet here they were, sitting in a house paid for by my brother, treating his face like a floor mat. I looked at the dog bowl in my hands, then looked back at Andre, who was busy wiping steak grease from his chin with a linen napkin. Enjoy your meal, Andre, I thought to myself, letting a tiny, imperceptible smile touch the corners of my mouth. Enjoy the wine. Enjoy the power, because this is the last peaceful dinner you will ever have. Kendra tossed her phone onto the thick mahogany table, the sharp clatter making Brenda jump slightly. Daddy, Kendra sighed, resting her chin on her perfectly manicured hands. Did you sign those power of attorney papers yet? I kept my head down, clutching the cheap plastic dog bowl. What papers, Kendra? I asked, forcing my voice to tremble with fake confusion. Oh my God, she groaned, rolling her eyes toward the glittering crystal chandelier above us. Do not play dumb with me, Daddy. The papers from the lawyer, the ones that give Andre control of the estate so we can finally fix this disgusting dump. I looked at her, staring into the face of my brother's flesh and blood. This was a girl. He had given absolutely everything to a girl who had drained his life savings without a second thought. You want to sell the house? I whispered, letting a pathetic quaver slip into my tone. I want a new car, Daddy, she snapped, her voice rising to a high, petulant whine. The luxury dealership called me today, and they have that pristine white Range Rover I have been begging for. But I need the massive down payment, and Andre says we cannot access the home equity until you sign away your rights. I stood there in the shadows thinking about the old rusted Ford pickup truck that my twin brother had driven for 20 long years. He sold that beloved truck to pay for her expensive college tuition. He walked miles in the brutal, suffocating Houston heat every single day just so she could have a fancy degree she never even bothered to use. I sold my truck for your school, Kendra, I said, my voice dropping just a fraction of an octave. That old piece of junk, she spat, taking a delicate sip of her sparkling water. You should have sold it years sooner. It was incredibly embarrassing, Daddy. All my sorority friends had parents driving luxury imported cars, and you showed up to my graduation ceremony looking exactly like the janitor. Andre snickered from across the table, slicing another thick piece of seared steak. He is a janitor, babe. Andre chuckled, his mouth full of meat. Just look at him. He practically belongs in the trash. I stared at her, feeling a deep, hollow ache in my chest for my gentle twin brother. He had loved this ungrateful, selfish child with every single ounce of his kind soul. He had sacrificed his hard-earned his physical comfort and his aching body to give her a life of pure ease. And this was his ultimate reward. A daughter who looked at him like he was a foul stain on her expensive imported rug. Just sign the stupid legal papers tomorrow, Kendra demanded, pointing a sharp, polished fingernail directly at my face. You do not even need the money, Daddy. You do not go anywhere. You do not do anything, and you literally just sit in the basement taking up valuable space. It is my money anyway, since I am your only child and you owe me for ruining my childhood with your poverty. I did not argue. I did not raise my deep voice, and I certainly did not tell her the truth. I did not tell her that she was talking to a ruthless military contractor, a man who could buy her entire pathetic life with the spare change in his tailored suit pocket. I simply nodded my head, letting my broad shoulders round forward, perfecting the illusion of a defeated, broken old man. Okay, princess, I muttered, looking at the floorboards. I will look for the papers tomorrow morning. See. Brenda said, wiping her greasy mouth with a crisp linen napkin. Was that so hard, Isaiah? You just have to listen to us because we obviously know what is best for you. Now take your disgusting little bowl and go downstairs. We have important wealthy guests coming over later, and I absolutely do not want them smelling your stench. I held the plastic dog bowl tight against my chest, feeling the cold, congealed grease sticking to my rough fingers. I turned away from the lavish feast, turning my back on the glittering crystal and their stolen, fake wealth. I walked slowly toward the swinging kitchen door, making sure each step was heavy, deliberate, and perfectly silent. I was studying them carefully, mapping out their individual weaknesses and cataloging every ounce of their toxic, unearned entitlement. They genuinely thought they were stripping me of my last shred of dignity, but they were gravely mistaken. They were really just handing me the rope to hang them with. I pushed through the heavy wooden door into the kitchen, carrying that pathetic plastic bowl. The bright fluorescent lights hummed above me, casting a harsh glare on the spotless granite countertops. Brenda followed close behind me, her high heels clicking sharply against the expensive tile floor. She did not trust me to walk away on my own, and she wanted to make sure I disappeared completely. Get down there before our company arrives, Brenda snapped, pointing her manicured finger toward the thick door at the end of the hallway. You are an embarrassment to this family, Isaiah, and I will not have you wandering around, looking like a homeless beggar. I kept my head bowed, my shoulders hunched forward, playing the part of the defeated old man to absolute perfection. I shuffled toward the basement door, feeling the cold air seeping out from underneath the frame. I reached out with a trembling hand, turning the brass knob slowly. The door creaked open, revealing a steep flight of wooden stairs that plunged into total darkness. A blast of damp air hit my face, carrying the foul smell of mold and stagnant water. This was not a living space, but a dungeon designed to break a man down. Do not come up until I explicitly call you tomorrow morning, Brenda ordered, standing a few feet away with her arms crossed tightly over her chest. And do not make any noise down there because Andre needs his sleep and we are tired of your endless coughing. I nodded slowly, staring down into the black abyss of my twin brother's daily nightmare. Yes, Brenda, I whispered, letting my voice crack with artificial fear. I will be quiet, I promise. She scoffed a short and ugly sound of pure contempt. You better be, she warned, or we will put you in a state facility so fast your head will spin. Now get down there. And stay out of our sight. I gripped the wobbly wooden handrail, taking my first step down into the freezing dark. I did not turn around to look at her, because I knew the sight of her arrogant face would make me lose my carefully crafted control. I descended the stairs slowly, acting as if my joints were filled with shattered glass while she watched me from the top landing like a cruel warden. As soon as both my feet hit the concrete floor at the bottom, the heavy door slammed shut above me. The sharp, metallic clack of the deadbolt sliding into place echoed loudly through the empty space. I was locked in. I stood alone in the pitch-black basement, listening to the muffled sounds of their laughter filtering down through the floorboards. I reached up and pulled a small string dangling from the ceiling. A single naked light bulb flickered to life, casting long and eerie shadows across the damp concrete walls. I looked around the miserable room, taking in the full extent of their cruelty. There was a thin mattress lying directly on the cold floor, covered with a stained sheet and a single ragged blanket. A plastic bucket sat in the far corner, serving as a makeshift toilet for a man who had worked his entire life to provide for them. My hands tightened around the plastic dog bowl, the cheap material groaning under the sudden pressure of my grip. I let out a slow, controlled breath, feeling the burning rage settling deep into the marrow of my bones. This was the exact spot where Isaiah had cried himself to sleep, shivering in the brutal Houston winter drafts, while his own family slept on expensive imported mattresses directly above his head. They had stripped him of his money, his dignity, and his freedom, treating him worse than a stray animal in the street. I walked over to the filthy mattress, dropping the dog bowl onto the concrete floor with a dull thud. I straightened my spine, rolling my broad shoulders back completely, shedding the posture of the broken old man. I was no longer the helpless victim they thought they had locked away. I was Marcus, and the time for playing the pathetic fool was rapidly coming to an end. The single light bulb buzzed, casting a sickly yellow glow over the damp concrete. I stood there for a moment, listening to the heavy footsteps of my son-in-law echoing through the floorboards above me. Andre was laughing, probably pouring himself another glass of my brother's expensive wine. Let him laugh, I thought to myself, feeling the cold rage solidify in my chest. I reached up and gripped the back of my neck, rolling my head from side to side, feeling the joints pop and crack. The frail posture of Isaiah Robinson, the broken old man they thought they had conquered, vanished completely. I stood up to my full height of 6'2", my chest expanding, drawing in the stale basement air. I walked over to the filthy mattress on the floor, my heavy boots making no sound on the concrete. I knelt down, ignoring the stench of mildew and despair, and reached into the deep pocket of my oversized trousers. I did not pull out a worn-out handkerchief or a bottle of cheap pills. I pulled out a sleek black satellite phone, an encrypted device that cost more than Andre's entire wardrobe. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner, and the screen glowed a sharp blue, illuminating my hard features in the dark. I dialed a secure number, a line that connected directly to a high-rise office in downtown Detroit. The phone rang twice before a deep voice answered on the other end. "Report?" The voice said, crisp and professional. "It is Marcus," I replied, keeping my voice low and steady. "I'm inside the Houston house and the target is completely unaware." "Understood, sir," my fixer responded, the sound of a keyboard clacking echoing through the receiver. "How is your brother doing, Marcus? Is he safe?" I thought about Isaiah sleeping in a 5-star hotel suite across town, eating a hot meal and finally resting his tired bones. "Isaiah is secure," I said, "but the situation here is worse than we anticipated. They have him sleeping on a concrete floor next to a bucket of human waste. They are feeding him scraps from a dog bowl, Silas." A heavy silence fell over the line, the kind of silence that precedes a massive explosion. Silas had been my right-hand man for 20 years, and he knew exactly what that kind of disrespect meant to our family. "What are your orders, boss?" Silas asked, his voice dripping with icy anticipation. I looked up at the ceiling, picturing Andre and Brenda sitting in their stolen luxury. "It is time to pull the plug." I said, my tone flat and devoid of any mercy. "I want you to freeze every single credit line connected to this address. Cancel the black market cards Andre uses for his gambling debts and block Brenda from her offshore accounts. I want their financial oxygen cut off completely and instantly." "Consider it done," Silas replied. "By tomorrow morning, their plastic will be useless pieces of garbage. Do we initiate the trap for the real estate deal?" "Yes," I commanded, stepping away from the mattress and pacing the small dark cell. "Contact the zoning board in Houston and leak the preliminary blueprints for the commercial shopping district. Let Andre think his $5 million payday is slipping through his greasy fingers. I want him desperate, Silas. I want him backed into a corner so he makes a stupid mistake." "It will be arranged before sunrise," Silas confirmed. "Watch your back down there, Marcus. Desperate rats tend to bite." I smiled in the dark, a cold and calculated expression that would have made Andre wet his pants. "Let them try to bite," I whispered. "I'm going to break every single tooth in their heads." I tapped the screen, ending the secure call, and slipped the black phone back into my deep pocket. I walked over to the small, grimy window near the ceiling, looking out at the dark Houston night. The humid air pressed against the glass, heavy with the promise of a coming storm. I stood in the dark, listening to the house settle around me, waiting patiently for the sun to rise. Tomorrow they were going to wake up in a world of financial ruin, and they would not even know who pulled the trigger. The game had officially started, and I was holding all the winning cards. The morning sun crawled through the tiny dirty window of the basement, casting a pale light on the concrete floor. I did not sleep because men like me do not need much rest, especially when there is a mission to complete. I listened to the floorboards groan above me, signaling that the parasites were finally waking up. Upstairs in the master bedroom that rightfully belonged to my brother Andre was stretching out on a California King mattress. I could hear the heavy thud of his bare feet hitting the expensive hardwood, followed by the smug, satisfied hum of a man who thought he had the world on a string. I unlocked the deadbolt from the inside using a small lockpick I kept hidden in the seam of my pants. I slipped out of the basement, moving with the silent, measured steps of a predator, and walked into the kitchen to prepare their morning coffee. I had to maintain my cover. I had to be the obedient servant just a little longer. I stood near the marble island, measuring out the premium coffee beans while Andre lumbered into the adjoining living room. He fell heavily onto the white leather sofa, not even noticing me standing in the shadows. He grabbed his sleek silver laptop from the glass coffee table, flipping it open with an arrogant flick of his wrist. He was smiling a greedy, sickening grin that stretched across his face as he navigated to an exclusive high-end jewelry website. I watched him carefully, keeping my eyes lowered while the coffee machine hissed and bubbled in the background. Andre was looking at a solid gold aviator watch, a timepiece that cost more than most people made in a decade. He muttered to himself, admiring the diamond-encrusted bezel, already spending the $5 million he thought he was going to steal from my brother. "This is it," Andre whispered to the empty room, his fingers dancing across the keyboard. He pulled a thick leather wallet from his silk pajama pants, extracting a sleek, heavy black credit card. It was an elite card, the kind issued to high rollers and men who moved dirty money through underground channels. He punched in the 16-digit number, his head bobbing to a silent rhythm, completely oblivious to the financial guillotine hanging directly over his neck. He hit the purchase button, leaning back into the soft leather cushions, waiting for the confirmation screen to flash its green light. But the screen did not flash green. It flashed a bright, angry red. "Transaction declined," the bold letters announced, glaring back at him in the dimly lit room. Andre scoffed, rolling his eyes in absolute annoyance. "Stupid fraud protection," he grumbled, leaning forward to type the numbers in again. He assumed it was a simple bank error, a minor inconvenience for a man of his immense fabricated stature. He hit submit a second time, pressing the key with a heavy, frustrated strike. The red banner appeared instantly, faster than before. "Card suspended. Please contact your financial institution." The smug smile slowly melted off his face, replaced by a deep, dark furrow between his eyebrows. He reached into his wallet again, his fingers moving with a sudden nervous energy, and pulled out a different card. This one was a platinum line of credit entirely funded by the equity he had illegally siphoned from Isaiah over the past 3 years. He entered the new numbers, his breathing growing slightly heavier, the silence in the room suddenly feeling very oppressive. "Submit. Declined. Account frozen." Andre froze his hands, hovering over the silver keyboard, his chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. "What the hell is going on?" he hissed, a sharp edge of panic bleeding into his previously arrogant voice. He grabbed his smartphone from the table, his thumb jabbing aggressively at the screen, dialing the private concierge number for his offshore bank. I stood silently in the kitchen, slowly pouring the steaming black coffee into a porcelain mug, enjoying the sweet, beautiful sound of his mounting terror. He pressed the phone to his ear, pacing back and forth across the expensive Persian rug. "Yeah, this is Andre." He barked into the receiver, entirely skipping the pleasantries. "My cards are not working, so fix it right now before I close all my accounts." He stopped pacing, listening to the voice on the other end of the line. I watched his shoulders tense, his knuckles turning a pale, sickly white as he gripped the phone. "What do you mean they are locked?" he shouted, his voice cracking with sudden, unadulterated fear. "Who authorized a freeze on my assets? I am the primary account holder." He stood perfectly still, listening to the automated nightmare unfolding in his ear. The customer service representative was telling him the truth, a truth engineered by my fixer Silas, hundreds of miles away in Detroit. Every single line of credit, every hidden account, every dirty dollar he had stashed away was instantly locked down, pending a massive fraud investigation. No. You listen to me." Andre stammered, his arrogance completely evaporating, replaced by the desperate pleading of a drowning man. "You cannot do this. I have outstanding balances. I have immediate obligations." The line went dead. He pulled the phone away from his ear, staring at the blank screen with wide, terrified eyes. His breathing was ragged, sounding like a wild animal caught in a steel trap. He dropped the phone onto the couch, his hands running frantically through his perfectly styled hair, ruining the expensive cut. "This cannot be happening," he whispered, his voice shaking violently. "Not today, not when I am so close to the payout." I picked up the porcelain mug, walking slowly out of the kitchen, letting my worn-out shoes drag across the floorboards. I stepped into the living room, keeping my head bowed, playing the part of the oblivious, obedient servant. "Your coffee, Andre." I said, my voice quiet, meek, and utterly harmless. He spun around, startled by my sudden appearance, his face pale and covered in a fine layer of cold sweat. He looked at me, his eyes wide and unfocused, seeing a pathetic old man completely unaware that he was staring directly at his executioner. "Get out of here," he yelled, his voice shrill, slapping the mug out of my hand. The hot coffee splashed across the floor, the ceramic shattering into a dozen sharp pieces. I did not flinch. I did not react. I simply stood there, absorbing his pathetic, desperate rage. "Clean it up, you stupid old fool," he screamed, turning his back to me, staring out the window at the humid Houston morning. I slowly knelt down, picking up the broken pieces of ceramic, a small, dark smile touching my lips. The first domino had officially fallen, and the magnificent sound of their total destruction was absolute music to my ears. I carefully gathered the sharp shards of ceramic, placing them into the palm of my rough hand. I stood up, keeping my head bowed, and shuffled slowly toward the kitchen trash can. As I deposited the broken pieces, the heavy thud of expensive heels clicked rapidly down the wooden staircase. It was Brenda. She descended the stairs like a visiting queen, draped in a bright yellow silk dress, her neck heavy with stolen gold. She had a wide, arrogant smile plastered across her face, completely oblivious to the financial bloodbath that had just slaughtered her husband in the living room. "Good morning, Andre," Brenda sang, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She walked over to the hallway mirror, adjusting a massive diamond earring, admiring her own reflection. "I have that exclusive charity luncheon at the River Oaks Country Club in an hour," she announced, smoothing the imaginary wrinkles from her silk skirt. "I need you to transfer another $5,000 to my checking account, Andre. The girls are doing a silent auction, and I absolutely refuse to be outbid by Susan Miller again." Andre did not answer her. He was still standing by the large bay window, staring out at the humid Houston morning, his hands gripping his hair. Brenda snapped, turning away from the mirror, her fake smile dissolving into a hard scowl. "Did you hear a single word I just said to you? I need that money transferred right now." Before Andre could formulate a lie, the shrill ring of Brenda's smartphone shattered the tense silence. She huffed in annoyance, digging into her designer leather handbag, pulling out the sleek device. She glanced at the screen, her frown instantly vanishing, replaced by that sickeningly sweet country club persona. "Hello, Brenda Robinson speaking," she answered, pressing the phone to her ear with a practiced elegance. I stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a damp rag, wiping down a spotless counter. I listened closely, focusing my highly trained ears on the tiny speaker of her phone. "Mrs. Robinson," a stiff, formal voice echoed from the receiver. "This is the membership director at River Oaks. I'm calling to inform you that your access privileges have been immediately revoked." Brenda froze, her manicured hand dropping slowly to her side. "Excuse me?" Brenda laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "There must be some kind of ridiculous mistake. I'm a Platinum tier member and my luncheon is starting in exactly 45 minutes. "There is no mistake, ma'am," the director replied, his tone as cold as winter ice. "Your payment methods have all been declined. We attempted to process your monthly dues as well as your outstanding bar tab, and every single account returned a hard freeze. Until the balance is settled in full and cash, security has been instructed to turn you away at the main gate. Good day, Mrs. Robinson." The line clicked dead. Brenda stood in the center of the lavish living room, her mouth hanging open, looking like a fish suffocating on dry land. The color drained completely from her face, leaving her expensive makeup looking like a cheap plastic mask. She stared at her phone, her chest heaving, her perfectly curated social life crumbling into dust in the span of 30 seconds. Brenda whispered, her voice trembling with absolute horror. "My card's the club. They just canceled my membership. They said my accounts are frozen." Andre finally turned around, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. "Mine too," he choked out, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Everything is locked, Brenda. The offshore accounts, the platinum cards, the black cards. It is all gone." Before Brenda could even begin to process the sheer magnitude of their ruin, the heavy oak front door slammed open, hitting the wall with a violent crash. Kendra stomped into the foyer, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She threw her expensive designer purse across the room, letting it smash against a delicate glass vase, shattering it instantly. "I hate you," Kendra screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at Andre. "You are a massive liar, Andre. You promised me that money was cleared." "Kendra, calm down," Brenda pleaded, rushing toward her furious daughter. "What on earth is happening? What is happening?" Kendra shrieked, tears of ultimate humiliation streaming down her face, ruining her perfect mascara. "I was sitting at the luxury dealership, Mom. I was sitting at the desk with the finance manager signing the paperwork for my new white Range Rover. I handed them my platinum card for the down payment, and the machine declined it. It declined it right in front of everyone." Kendra covered her face with her hands, letting out a loud, dramatic sob. "The manager cut the card in half right in front of my face," Kendra wailed, stomping her foot on the hardwood floor. "He said the bank flagged it for massive fraud. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? I had to call a cheap taxi cab just to get back to this disgusting house." I stood in the shadows of the kitchen, wiping the same spot on the counter, my face completely blank. Inside, my heart was beating with a steady, triumphant rhythm. The panic was setting in, spreading through the household like a highly contagious virus. The walls they had built with my brother's stolen money were finally caving in on them. "This is a mistake," Andre yelled, pacing the room like a caged animal. "It has to be a bank error, a massive system glitch. I am going to call the regional manager. I'm going to sue them for every penny they have. You better fix this, Andre," Brenda hissed, stepping into his personal space, her eyes blazing with panic and fury. "If I cannot go to that luncheon today, I will be the laughingstock of all Houston. You fix this right now, or I swear to God I will make you deeply regret it." I slowly folded the damp rag, placing it neatly next to the sink. The dominoes were falling exactly as I had planned. The financial squeeze was suffocating them, choking the arrogant life right out of their lungs. But this was only the morning, and the day was just getting started. The heavy silence in the living room shattered, breaking into a million jagged pieces of pure panic. I turned my back on the hysterical family walking slowly toward the kitchen sink. A steady drip of water echoed from the rusted faucet, a minor annoyance that Isaiah had complained about for weeks, but nobody had bothered to fix. I opened the wooden cabinet beneath the counter, pulling out a heavy metal wrench, and carefully slid my large frame under the dark, cramped space. It was the perfect vantage point, a hidden bunker where I could listen to the glorious sound of their empire tearing itself apart. "What did you do with the money?" Brenda screamed, her voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. "You told me the accounts were completely secure. You told me the equity transfer from this disgusting house was safely hidden in the Caymans." Andre let out a wild, cornered laugh, pacing the hardwood floor like a rabid dog. "Me?" he shouted back, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. "You are blaming me, Brenda. What about your secret shopping sprees, huh? What about the $50,000 you blew on designer bags and European spa retreats just last month? Do not play the innocent victim with me, because I see exactly how you drain the accounts." I gripped the cold steel wrench, twisting a loose brass nut on the leaking pipe, letting out a slow, silent breath. The rats were finally turning on each other, trapped in the sinking ship of their own boundless greed. "You arrogant, pathetic little boy," Brenda hissed, her footsteps clicking rapidly across the floorboards as she advanced on him. "I know all about your late-night poker games, Andre. I know about the massive losses you have been hiding from the family. Did you gamble away our entire safety net? Did you give it all to those dangerous criminals you associate with downtown?" "Shut your mouth," Andre roared, his voice booming with a sudden violent edge. "You do not know anything about my business. The money is just tied up. It is a temporary liquidity issue. I just need to make a few phone calls and everything will be perfectly fine." "Nothing is fine," Kendra shrieked, throwing herself onto the white leather sofa, sobbing uncontrollably. "My entire life is ruined. My friends are going to find out my card declined, and I will be a complete social outcast. You both promised me a luxury lifestyle, and now I'm riding in cheap taxicabs like a common peasant." I tightened the wrench, the metal teeth biting hard into the rusted pipe. A common peasant, I thought to myself, feeling a bitter wave of disgust wash over me. My brother had worked 40 grueling years in the brutal Texas heat-building infrastructure with his bare, bleeding hands just so this spoiled child could cry about a declined credit card. "We need cash right now," Brenda demanded, completely ignoring her weeping daughter. "If I do not show up to the River Oaks Country Club with a cleared balance today, I will be permanently expelled from the board of directors. I will not let you humiliate me in front of high society, Andre. I simply will not allow it." "Well, I do not have it," Andre yelled, his heavy breathing echoing through the house. "The credit lines are frozen dead. The bank manager will not even take my calls. Someone triggered a massive fraud alert on our entire portfolio, and we are completely locked out of the system." "Then fix it," Brenda screamed, her voice reaching a hysterical, glass-shattering pitch. I slid out from under the sink, wiping my grease-stained hands on a dirty rag. I slowly stood up, keeping my head bowed. My shoulders slumped forward, stepping back into the harsh light of the kitchen. I looked into the living room, watching the three of them hyperventilating in a tight circle of pure, unadulterated panic. Andre was sweating profusely, his expensive silk shirt clinging to his back, his eyes darting frantically around the room. "There is only one way out of this," Andre whispered, his voice suddenly dropping to a low, desperate growl. He looked directly at Brenda, a dark, predatory hunger replacing the fear in his eyes. "We need the house, Brenda. We need the $5 million commercial buyout from the developers, and we need it today." Brenda stopped yelling, her chest heaving as she processed his desperate words. "But Isaiah has not signed the power of attorney," Brenda replied, her voice trembling with anxiety. "He is dragging his feet, and the lawyers need his actual signature to legally transfer the title into your name. Then we make him sign it." Andre hissed, his hands curling into tight, violent fists. "We stop asking nicely, Brenda. The developers are getting incredibly impatient, and if we do not deliver this exact plot of land by the end of the week, they will walk away from the entire project. If they walk away, we are completely bankrupt, and those men I owe money to will not just send a politely worded letter. I stood perfectly still by the kitchen counter, my heart beating with a steady, lethal calm. The true motive was finally spoken out loud, hanging in the heavy Houston air like a death sentence. It was never about a nursing home, and it was never about taking care of a sick old man. It was about $5 million of commercial real estate sitting right underneath my worn-out shoes. "Daddy is standing right there," Kendra whined, pointing a shaking finger toward the kitchen. "He is listening to us, you absolute idiots." Andre slowly turned his head, his bloodshot eyes locking onto my hunched, pathetic frame. He looked at me with a mixture of absolute disgust and pure predatory desperation. He took a heavy step toward the kitchen, his jaw clenched tight, ready to unleash his fury on the only target he thought he could safely control. "You," Andre barked, pointing directly at my chest. "Go back down to the basement right now, and do not you dare come out until I call you. We have extremely important paperwork for you to sign tonight, old man, and you better be ready to write your name, or I swear to God things are going to get very ugly for you." I looked at him, letting a fake, trembling fear wash over my face. "Yes, Andre," I whispered, clutching the dirty rag tightly in my hands. "I will go down right now. I am sorry." I turned away from them, shuffling slowly toward the heavy basement door. They thought they had me cornered. They thought they could terrorize me into signing away my brother's rightful fortune. But as I opened the door and stepped back into the dark, cold abyss, a genuine smile spread across my face. They were desperate, they were completely out of options, and they were about to walk blindly into the deadliest trap I had ever built. The heavy basement door clicked shut above me, locking me in the damp, freezing dark. I stood at the bottom of the wooden stairs, listening to the muffled sounds of shouting filtering through the floorboards. Andre was screaming at Brenda, and Kendra was throwing things against the living room wall. They were completely consumed by their financial panic, entirely focused on their own collapsing world. That was exactly what I needed. I walked over to the filthy mattress, reaching under the thin, stained blanket. I pulled out my black canvas duffel bag, the one I had smuggled in the night I took my twin brother's place. I unzipped the heavy bait, pulling out a fresh set of clothes. I could not walk into a downtown corporate high-rise looking like a discarded beggar. I stripped off the oversized mildew-soaked trousers and the ripped flannel shirt. I put on a pair of dark tailored slacks and a crisp black button-down shirt. I slipped my feet into polished leather boots, leaving the taped-up ruined shoes sitting next to the bucket of waste. I took a small wet towel from a sealed plastic bag, wiping the grime and fake dirt from my face and neck. I looked at my reflection in the small cracked mirror resting against the concrete wall. The hunched, pathetic old man was gone, replaced by a ghost who was ready to go to war. I walked to the small ground-level window at the top of the concrete wall. It was painted shut, covered in years of dirt and neglect. I pulled a small steel pry bar from my bag, wedging it under the wooden frame. I applied a steady, controlled pressure, snapping the rusted latch with a sharp, satisfying crack. I pushed the window open, letting the humid, thick Houston air flood into the stagnant basement. I hoisted my large frame up, pulling myself through the narrow opening with the practiced ease of a man who had survived a dozen hostile environments. I dropped quietly onto the overgrown grass of the backyard, landing on the balls of my feet. The house was completely chaotic inside. Nobody was looking out the windows. I walked through the neglected garden, slipping through a broken slat in the wooden privacy fence. I walked down the cracked concrete alleyway, putting 3 blocks between myself and the toxic environment of my brother's prison. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my encrypted satellite phone, and pressed a single button. A massive, pitch-black Cadillac Escalade turned the corner, rolling silently down the residential street. The tinted windows hid the interior, projecting an aura of absolute, untouchable wealth. The heavy vehicle pulled to a smooth stop right beside me. The rear door opened automatically, and I climbed into the air-conditioned, leather-scented cabin. The driver, a broad-shouldered man wearing a sharp suit and an earpiece, nodded to me in the rearview mirror. Downtown, I commanded my voice, dropping to its natural, deep, commanding rumble. "Take me to the Vanguard building and make it fast." "Yes, sir," the driver replied, shifting the massive vehicle into gear. We glided onto the Houston highway, the tires humming against the hot Texas asphalt. I watched the sprawling city pass by the tinted glass, feeling the cool air conditioning dry the sweat on my forehead. I was leaving the dirt and the abuse behind, stepping back into the world where I wielded absolute terrifying power. We navigated through the towering skyscrapers of the downtown district, pulling up to a massive, sleek high-rise made entirely of blue glass and polished steel. It was a fortress of corporate wealth, a place where men like Andre desperately wanted to belong but never truly could. The driver stopped right at the front entrance, completely ignoring the valet signs. I stepped out of the vehicle, feeling the brutal heat of the sun for just a second before walking through the revolving glass doors. The lobby was expansive, filled with expensive modern art and men in $1,000 suits. A stern security guard stood behind a marble desk, ready to stop anyone who did not belong. I walked straight past him, completely ignoring the sign and sheet. I reached into my pocket, pulling out a solid black key card, and tapped it against the private elevator terminal. The doors slid open instantly, welcoming me into the secure executive lift. The elevator shot upwards, pressing me gently into the plush, carpeted floor. It stopped on the 50th floor, the penthouse level where the air was quiet and the views were worth millions. The doors parted, revealing a massive open concept office decorated in dark mahogany and brushed steel. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding panoramic view of the entire Houston skyline. Sitting behind a massive custom-built desk was a man tapping rapidly on a silver keyboard. His name was Vance, and he was the most expensive, ruthless private investigator in the state of Texas. Vance looked up, pushing his thin wire glasses up his nose. He did not smile because we did not pay him to be friendly. We paid him to be perfectly lethal. Marcus Vance said, closing his laptop with a sharp click. "You clean up well, considering you have been sleeping on a concrete floor for 2 days." I walked over to the massive desk, pulling up a heavy leather chair, and sat down. "Cut the small talk, Vance," I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the polished wood. "Silas told me you found the paper trail. I want to see exactly what my greedy son-in-law is hiding, and I want to know exactly how deep his grave is going to be." Vance nodded slowly, reaching into his desk drawer. He pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder, dropping it onto the desk with a loud, satisfying thud. This was not a random guess. This was hard, undeniable proof. This was the weapon I was going to use to completely destroy the man who had tortured my twin brother. "Open it," Vance instructed, sliding the folder across the smooth mahogany surface. "It is worse than we thought, Marcus. Andre is not just a greedy little real estate broker. He is a dead man walking." I placed my hands on the folder, feeling the weight of the secrets hidden inside. I took a slow, deep breath, preparing to read the absolute worst about a man I already completely despised. I opened the heavy manila folder, flipping back the thick cover. Inside, a stack of glossy photographs and highly detailed financial spreadsheets stared back at me. I spread the papers out across the polished mahogany desk, examining the meticulous work Vance had compiled. "Look at the first photograph," Vance said, pointing a silver pen at a grainy image. "That was taken 3 nights ago outside a heavily guarded warehouse near the Houston shipping channel." I picked up the photo, studying the sweaty, terrified face of my son-in-law. Andre was standing under a flickering street lamp, talking to a massive man covered in dark tattoos. "Who is the big guy?" I asked, keeping my voice low and steady. "His name is Hector Vance," replied, leaning back in his expensive leather chair. He runs one of the largest, most violent underground gambling rings in the state of Texas. He caters to arrogant corporate brokers, men who want to play high-stakes poker but lack the actual cash to back up their bets. And Andre lacks the cash, I stated, dropping the photograph back onto the desk. Andre is completely underwater, Vance confirmed, tapping a finger on a highlighted spreadsheet. He's been playing at Hector private tables for 6 months, chasing massive losses, trying to win back the money he already stole from your brother. As of yesterday morning, his outstanding debt crossed the threshold of $150,000. I felt a cold, calculating calm wash over my entire body. $150,000. It was a staggering amount of money for a normal family, but for a degenerate gambler like Andre, it was a death sentence. Hector is not a bank. Vance continued, his tone turning incredibly serious. He does not send polite collection letters, and he certainly does not negotiate payment plans. When you owe Hector that kind of money, he takes it out of your flesh. He gave Andre exactly 1 week to deliver the cash in full, or they are going to break both of his legs. I flipped through the rest of the documents, absorbing every single detail of Andre and his pathetic hidden life. There were copies of forged bank statements, fake collateral agreements, and a desperate paper trail of a man running out of time. He was completely cornered, trapped between the violent mobsters he owed and the frozen bank accounts Silas had just orchestrated. He thought he could use the house, I said, staring at a copy of the property deed that was tucked into the back of the folder. He thought he could force Isaiah to sign over the estate, sell it to the commercial developers, and use the millions to wipe his slate clean with the mob. Exactly. Vance nodded, steepling his fingers together. He needs that $5 million payout, Marcus. It is his only lifeline. If he does not secure the title to that land by Friday, Hector is going to send his enforcers directly to the house. They will not just hurt Andre, they will tear through anyone standing in their way, including your brother and your niece. I closed the manila folder, feeling the heavy weight of the paper in my hands. Andre had brought a violent underground syndicate directly to my family front door. He had risked the life of my twin brother, a gentle man, who had never hurt a single soul, all to cover his own pathetic gambling addiction. We need to tighten the noose, I commanded, standing up from the leather chair. Silas already froze his credit cards, but I want to push him over the absolute edge. I want him to feel the hot breath of the mob on his neck right inside that house. What do you need me to do? Vance asked, opening his silver laptop, ready to execute my orders. Call Hector lieutenants anonymously, I instructed, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling window looking out over the sprawling city of Houston. Tell them Andre is actively trying to flee the state. Tell them his bank accounts are frozen and he is packing his bags for a permanent vacation. Vance let out a low, impressed whistle. That is going to accelerate their timeline, Marcus. They will not wait until Friday. They will send a message today. That is exactly what I want, I replied, turning back to face the private investigator. I want Andre to realize that his time is completely up. I want him shaking with absolute terror, so when I finally drop the hammer on him, he knows exactly why his life is over. Consider the call made, Vance said, his fingers already flying across the keyboard. You better get back to the house, Marcus. The fireworks are going to start very soon. I took the heavy folder, tucking it securely under my arm. I walked out of the plush executive office, stepping back into the private elevator. The doors slid shut, sealing me in the quiet steel box as I began my descent back down to the street level. I was returning to the prison, but I was no longer an inmate. I was the warden, and the execution was officially scheduled. The elevator doors parted on the ground floor. I walked through the towering glass lobby, stepping out into the brutal, suffocating Houston heat. The black Cadillac Escalade was waiting at the curb, the engine purring quietly. The driver opened the heavy rear door, and I slid into the cool, leather-scented interior. Drive around the block a few times, I instructed the driver before heading back to the neighborhood. I need to review these documents before I return to the dungeon. I opened the heavy manila folder again, spreading the thick stack of papers across the empty leather seat next to me. Vance had not just given me photographs of violent mobsters, he had given me the exact blueprints of my twin brother's destruction. I pulled out a massive, folded, topographical map, spreading it wide across my lap. It was a Houston City zoning map, officially stamped by the County Planning Commission, dated exactly 6 months ago. The map detailed a massive, sprawling commercial development called the Westheimer Galleria Expansion. It was a $100 million project designed to bring luxury retail, towering condominiums, and massive corporate wealth to a forgotten section of the city. I traced my finger along the red boundary lines following the proposed access roads and the massive parking structures. Right in the absolute dead center of the red zone, sitting like a stubborn rock in a rushing river, was a small rectangular plot of land. It was my brother's property. It was the exact house where they were currently starving me. I pulled a confidential corporate memo from the bottom of the stack, reading the stark, undeniable truth. The developers, a massive shell company called Obsidian Holdings, had already quietly purchased all the surrounding neighborhood lots for absolute pennies. But they could not break ground. They could not pour a single ounce of concrete without securing my brother's specific acre of dirt. It was the Keystone lot, the only viable location for the massive main entrance. The memo stated clearly that the developers had authorized a maximum buyout offer of $5 million just to secure that single dilapidated house. $5 million. I stared at the spelled-out number, feeling the cold, hard reality of their vicious betrayal settling into my mind. Andre was a mid-level broker at a commercial real estate firm, a man who pushed papers and fetched coffee for men far wealthier than him. He must have seen these blueprints months ago, recognizing his own father-in-law's address right in the middle of a gold mine. He knew Isaiah was sitting on a massive fortune. He actively decided to steal it instead of sharing the incredible blessing with the family. This was exactly why Brenda suddenly locked my brother in the basement, taking away his phone and his freedom. This was why Andre pushed him into a deep depression, treating him like a useless burden. They were deliberately breaking his spirit, exhausting him physically and mentally, so he would blindly sign the power of attorney paperwork just to make the daily abuse stop. Andre was going to forge the sale, take the massive $5 million payout from the developers, pay off his violent mob debts, and vanish completely. He was going to run away to a tropical beach, leaving his wife and his mother-in-law with absolutely nothing. I gathered the thick papers, sliding them back into the heavy manila folder, my hands shaking with a rare, uncontrollable rage. My brother had worked for 40 years, sacrificing his own comfort to buy that modest little house. It was his sanctuary, his piece of the American dream. His own flesh and blood was preparing to pave over it for a quick payout. They did not just want to steal his money, they wanted to erase his entire legacy as if he had never even existed at all. "Take me back to the house," I commanded the driver, my voice echoing with a dangerous, lethal calm. "Drop me off 3 blocks away in the back alley." The ride back to the residential neighborhood was silent, the hum of the tires matching the steady, violent rhythm of my heart. I was no longer just protecting my brother. I was defending his entire kingdom. I tucked the heavy folder into my canvas duffel bag, stepping out of the luxurious vehicle back into the suffocating, humid air. I walked down the cracked alleyway, approaching the broken wooden fence of my brother's backyard. I slipped through the loose boards, dropping quietly onto the overgrown grass. The house stood before me, silent and completely unaware of the massive storm gathering right outside its walls. I climbed back through the rust basement window, dropping down onto the cold, damp concrete floor. I changed back into the oversized, filthy clothes, hiding my burner phone and the evidence deep inside my bag. I sat on the stained mattress, waiting in the dark, knowing that the mob was already on their way to collect their debt. I sat in the dark, my back resting against the cold concrete wall, listening to the heavy, oppressive silence of the house. The afternoon heat was brutal, pressing down on the Houston suburbs like a suffocating blanket. I knew Hector and his men moved fast, because violent debt collectors do not waste time on pleasantries. Up above me, the floorboards creaked as Andre paced frantically back and forth across the living room. He was a trapped animal, completely out of options, waiting for a miracle that was never going to come. Suddenly, the deep, guttural roar of a high-powered engine shattered the quiet neighborhood street. It was not a delivery truck, and it was not a passing neighbor. The sound was aggressive, intentional, and it stopped directly outside the front of the house. I stood up from the filthy mattress, walking quietly to the bottom of the wooden stairs, straining my ears to catch every single detail. I heard the sharp, violent screech of heavy tires against the hot asphalt. Then a massive, deafening crash echoed through the entire house. It sounded like a bomb going off, a violent explosion of shattering glass and crunching metal. Brenda let out a piercing, blood-curdling scream from the kitchen. Andre yelled something unintelligible, his heavy footsteps thundering across the hardwood floor as he sprinted toward the front door. I slipped my lockpick out of my pocket, popping the basement deadbolt in 2 seconds flat. I pushed the heavy door open just a crack, peering through the narrow gap down the hallway, keeping my large frame completely hidden in the shadows. Andre threw the front door open, stepping out onto the front porch, his chest heaving with absolute terror. Brenda and Kendra crowded behind him, their faces pale and completely drained of their usual arrogant color. I watched them stare out at the driveway, entirely paralyzed by the brutal reality of the violence they had invited into my brother's home. Sitting in the driveway, completely destroyed, was Andre prized possession. His sleek, black, imported luxury sedan had a massive gray cinder block smashed directly through the center of the windshield. The safety glass was shattered into a million tiny, glittering pieces, covering the expensive leather seats and the pristine dashboard. The hood of the car was deeply dented, the pristine paint job completely ruined by the brutal impact. "Oh my God," Brenda shrieked, pressing her manicured hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with absolute horror. "Who did this, Andre? What is happening to us?" Kendra burst into hysterical tears, clutching her mother's arm, completely unable to process the violence shattering her perfect suburban bubble. "Call the police," Kendra sobbed, her voice trembling violently. "Someone is trying to kill us, Daddy. Please call the police right now." "No," Andre roared, spinning around, his face completely pale and slick with cold sweat. "Do not call the cops, Brenda. Do not you dare touch that phone." He stumbled off the wooden porch, his expensive shoes crunching over the shattered glass scattered across the hot concrete driveway. He reached through the gaping hole in the windshield, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grip the heavy cinder block. He pulled the rough concrete block out of the ruined car, dropping it heavily onto the driveway. Taped to the side of the block was a thick white piece of paper covered in thick black marker. Andre ripped the paper off the block, his eyes darting across the handwritten words. I watched from the crack in the basement door, seeing his entire body go completely limp, as if someone had just drained the blood right out of his veins. He dropped the note onto the ground, staggering backward, gripping the side of his ruined car, just to keep himself from collapsing. "What does it say?" Brenda demanded, running down the porch steps, completely ignoring the sharp glass slicing into the soles of her expensive shoes. She snatched the paper off the ground, holding it up to the harsh afternoon sunlight. Her voice shook, dropping to a terrified, hoarse whisper as she read the message out loud. "You are out of time, Andre. Tomorrow we throw the brick through your front window and we aim for the people inside. You owe Hector $150,000 in cash by midnight." Brenda dropped the paper, letting it flutter onto the hot concrete. She looked at Andre, her eyes burning with a mixture of absolute terror and pure venomous hatred. "You brought the mob to my house," Brenda screamed, her voice echoing down the quiet suburban street. "You brought violent criminals to the place where your own daughter sleeps, you pathetic, disgusting coward. I do not have the money." Andre choked out, sliding down the side of the ruined car, sitting on the glass-covered driveway with his head in his hands. The accounts are frozen, Brenda. I cannot even buy a cup of coffee right now. They are going to kill me. They are going to kill all of us. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, feeling a cold, dark satisfaction settling deep into my chest. The arrogant, greedy son-in-law, the man who had tormented my gentle brother for years, was finally experiencing true, paralyzing fear. He was a small, weak man, completely crushed under the immense weight of his own disastrous choices. "Get up!" Brenda hissed, grabbing Andre by the collar of his expensive silk shirt, dragging him off the concrete. "We are not dying because of your stupid gambling debts, Andre. We are getting that $5 million payout from the developers, and we are paying these monsters off tonight." How Andre sobbed, wiping the sweat and tears from his pale face. The old man will not sign the power of attorney. He just stares at the floor and mumbles like an idiot. We need his legal signature to transfer the title, Brenda, or the developers will not give us a single dime. "Then we make him sign it," Brenda snarled, her face twisting into a mask of pure, desperate cruelty. "We go down to that basement right now and we do not let him sleep. We do not let him eat until he puts his name on that dotted line. If he refuses, I will break his fingers myself." I let the basement door click quietly shut, locking the deadbolt from the inside, plunging myself back into the dark, damp cell. I walked back to the filthy mattress, sitting down on the edge, resting my large hands on my knees. They were coming for me, fueled by panic and the absolute certainty of their own impending destruction. They were going to try and force the broken old man to save their pathetic lives. I stared at the closed wooden door at the top of the stairs, my muscles coiled tightly, ready to unleash a lifetime of hard, violent justice. "Come on down, Brenda," I whispered into the dark, empty room. "I'm waiting for you." I sat in the pitch-black basement, listening to the heavy footsteps pacing back and forth across the ceiling. The panic upstairs was practically vibrating through the wooden floorboards. Brenda was screaming, demanding that Andre fix the massive mess he had brought to her front door, but I could hear the sheer, undeniable terror in Andre's voice. He knew a legal signature on a power of attorney document would take too many days to process. The greedy bank needed time, the slow lawyers needed time, and Hector, the violent mob boss, was not giving them any time at all. "If the old man just dies," Andre hissed, his voice slipping perfectly through the rusted heating vent above my head, "the entire estate goes directly to you, Brenda. We could borrow a massive loan against the house immediately without any legal delays or waiting periods." Brenda stopped pacing right above me. The absolute heavy silence that followed was truly terrifying. She did not argue. She did not defend her gentle husband of 40 years. She just let the evil, murderous idea hang in the humid Houston air. "Do it tonight," Brenda whispered, her voice colder than the deep Texas winter. "Make it look like a tragic, unavoidable accident." I heard the heavy basement door creak open at the top of the wooden stairs. I quickly laid down on the filthy, mildew-stained mattress, pulling the thin, ragged blanket all the way up to my chin. I closed my eyes, slowing my breathing down to a deep, rhythmic hum, playing the part of a deeply exhausted, defenseless elder. Andre walked down the creaking steps, trying desperately to keep his expensive leather shoes from making a sound. He did not walk toward my resting body. He walked directly toward the far corner of the dark basement where the massive, rusted iron furnace sat against the cold concrete wall. I opened my eyes, just a tiny fraction, watching his shadowy silhouette move through the dim yellow light. He pulled a heavy steel wrench from his back pocket. His soft hands were shaking violently, but his desperate greed was much stronger than his cowardly fear. He reached down to the thick yellow flexible gas pipe, the main line that fed the ancient heating unit. He fit the wrench around the brass connecting nut and pulled hard. A soft, sinister hissing sound immediately filled the quiet basement. The foul smell of rotten eggs, the distinct chemical odor of raw natural gas, began to bleed rapidly into the stagnant air. Andre stood up, wiping his sweaty forehead with the back of his trembling hand. He looked over at my motionless body laying completely still on the ruined mattress. "Sleep tight, old man," Andre whispered, his voice dripping with pathetic, sickening malice. He turned around, hurrying back up the wooden stairs, desperate to put distance between himself and the massive bomb he had just armed. The heavy door clicked shut, and the deadbolt locked me inside the gas chamber. I waited exactly 30 seconds, making absolutely sure the coward was completely gone. I threw off the thin blanket standing up in the pitch-black room. The smell of the deadly gas was getting much stronger, burning the back of my throat, threatening to fill the enclosed space with explosive poison. I walked quickly over to the rusted furnace, feeling the smooth brass nut with my large, calloused fingers. I did not panic because men like me thrive in the absolute dark. I reached into my canvas bag, pulling out my own heavy tools. I gripped the loose brass nut, twisting it violently to the right, tightening the critical connection until the deadly hissing sound completely stopped. I checked the joint with my bare hands, making sure not a single drop of gas was escaping into the room. Andre was a complete fool, a soft, pampered guy playing a highly dangerous game with a seasoned, lethal military contractor. He wanted to stage a tragic accident to burn my gentle brother alive for a quick, bloody payout. That crossed the final absolute line. I reached back into my deep duffel bag, pulling out 3 small black devices. They were high-definition military-grade surveillance cameras complete with infrared night vision and secure encrypted audio recording. I placed the first tiny camera directly above the furnace, hiding the small lens inside a rusted air duct, pointing it straight down at the gas valve. I walked over to the wooden stairs, placing the second camera under the top step, aiming it directly at the heavy basement door to catch anyone coming down. The third camera went into the high ceiling corner, providing a massive, wide-angle view of the entire miserable cell. I synced the hidden cameras to my encrypted burner phone, watching the crystal-clear video feed pop up on my glowing screen. I had him. I had the attempted murder plot completely disabled, and I was going to capture every single miserable piece of his next desperate move. I sat back down on the filthy mattress, breathing in the clean air, smiling into the dark. "You missed your shot, Andre," I whispered to the empty room. "And tomorrow morning, I am going to make you sweat absolute blood." The heavy Texas sun began to bake the cracked earth outside, bleeding a pale, sickly light through the tiny basement window. I stood up from the damp concrete, stretching my massive frame, feeling the satisfying pop of my joints. It was morning, and upstairs my executioners were waiting for a coroner, not a coffee. I walked to the bottom of the wooden stairs, listening to the frantic, hushed whispers bleeding through the floorboards. "Did you hear anything?" Brenda hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of terror and greedy anticipation. "Nothing," Andre whispered back, his heavy boots pacing rapidly across the living room rug. "The house should be full of gas by now, Brenda. One spark from the furnace and it all goes up, or he just suffocates in his sleep. I'm going to check, just be ready to call the paramedics and act like a grieving widow." I smiled a cold, predatory grin that stretched across my face. I reached into my pocket, turning off the live feed on my burner phone, and tucked it safely away. I did not wait for him to come down. I unlocked the deadbolt from the inside, swinging the heavy wooden door open with a loud, aggressive creak. I stepped out into the hallway, standing completely upright for just a fraction of a second before dropping my shoulders back into the pathetic slump of my twin brother. Andre was standing right outside the kitchen, holding a white linen handkerchief over his mouth and nose, expecting a wave of toxic fumes to hit him in the face. When he saw me step out of the shadows, perfectly alive and breathing normal oxygen, all the blood instantly drained from his soft, pampered face. He took a massive step backward, stumbling over the edge of the expensive Persian rug, his eyes bulging out of his skull. "Good morning, Andre," I said, my voice adopting the weak, raspy tremble of a broken old man. I slept incredibly well down there, but there was a strange smell near the furnace. Andre dropped the handkerchief, his jaw hanging completely open, staring at me like I was a literal ghost walking through his hallway. "You," he stammered, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. "You are awake?" "Yes," I nodded, shuffling slowly toward the kitchen counter. The gas pipe was a little loose, Andre. It was hissing right next to my mattress, but do not worry, I found a heavy wrench and tightened the brass nut all by myself. I know you do not like to pay for expensive plumbers, so I fixed it for free. Brenda walked out of the master bedroom tying a silk robe tightly around her waist, expecting to see a tragedy. When she saw me pouring a glass of tap water, she froze completely, her eyes darting frantically toward her terrified husband. "What is he doing up here?" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking under the immense pressure of their failed murderous plot. "He fixed the pipe." Andre whispered, his voice completely hollow, realizing his desperate assassination attempt had just been dismantled by a supposedly senile old fool. I took a slow sip of the cold water, watching them sweat in the humid, suffocating heat of their own ruined home. "I fixed a lot of things down there," I muttered, keeping my gaze locked firmly on the kitchen floor. "I even checked the brake lines on your ruined car outside Andre, just to be absolutely safe." Andre swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing up and down in his throat. He looked at Brenda, sheer, unadulterated panic completely taking over his mind. The mob deadline was midnight tonight, and his primary target was standing in the kitchen, casually drinking a glass of tap water. They were completely out of time, and murder was officially off the table. "Get into the living room," Isaiah Brenda commanded, pointing her shaking finger at the worn-out sofa. "Just sit there and do not move a single muscle, do you understand me?" I nodded submissively, shuffling away from the counter, taking a seat on the very edge of the leather cushion. I kept my head down, but I listened intently as Andre pulled Brenda into the far corner of the kitchen, their voices dropping to a frantic, desperate whisper. "What do we do now?" Brenda hissed, tears of frustration forming in the corners of her eyes. "Hector men are coming tonight, Andre, and they are going to burn this house to the absolute ground." "We pivot," Andre replied, his voice shaking with a sudden dark adrenaline. "If we cannot get the property deed through a tragic accident, we take it through the legal courts today. We strip his rights completely, Brenda, right now." How Brenda asked, her panic reaching a fever pitch. "I know a guy," Andre whispered, looking over his shoulder to make sure I was not listening. "Dr. Lawrence Davis. He is a private psychiatrist down in the medical district, and he owes a massive gambling debt to the exact same people I do. He is completely crooked, Brenda. He writes fake prescriptions and signs whatever legal documents you pay him to sign." Brenda gasped, a sickening smile of relief slowly spreading across her face. "You want to declare him legally incompetent?" she asked, the evil plan fully forming in her greedy mind. "Yes." Andre nodded, pulling out his smartphone, his thumbs flying across the screen. "We take the old man to the clinic this morning. Davis pumps him full of heavy, disorienting sedatives until he's practically drooling on his own shirt. Davis signs the emergency medical evaluation declaring him a severe danger to himself and granting you immediate absolute medical and financial conservatorship. Once you have the legal power of attorney signed by a doctor, we call the developers, we forge the sale of the land, and we pay the mob before the sun sets." It was a vicious, disgusting pivot. They were going to chemically lobotomize my sweet brother, turning his brain into absolute mush just to steal his life savings and save their own pathetic skin. They thought they had found a brilliant loophole, a corrupt doctor who would gladly destroy an innocent man for a few $1,000s. "Get up, Isaiah," Andre yelled, marching out of the kitchen with a newfound arrogant swagger. "Put your shoes on right now. You have a doctor appointment this morning, old man, and we are going to make absolutely sure you are taken care of." I looked up at him, my eyes wide with fake, trembling fear. "A doctor?" I asked, clutching the fabric of my oversized trousers. "I am not sick, Andre. Please do not make me go. You are very sick, Daddy. Kendra sneered, walking down the stairs fully dressed in a designer outfit, ready to watch her own father be stripped of his basic human rights. Your mind is completely gone, and we are just trying to protect our family assets from your absolute stupidity. I slowly stood up from the sofa, keeping my head bowed, hiding the lethal burning fury in my eyes. I walked toward the front door, slipping my feet into the taped-up, ruined shoes. They were going to drag me to a corrupt clinic, hoping to pump my veins full of heavy drugs and steal the $5 million property from right under my nose. But they did not know the man they were putting in the back of their car. I was not Isaiah. I was Marcus, and I was about to turn their crooked doctor into my own personal weapon. We piled into the back of a cheap-smelling taxicab because Andre no longer had a luxury vehicle to parade around in. The ride across the sweltering city of Houston was completely silent heavy with the suffocating weight of their desperate greed. Brenda sat in the front passenger seat, nervously checking her perfectly applied makeup in the visor mirror while Andre chewed furiously on his fingernails next to me. I slouched low against the sticky vinyl seat, letting my head loll to the seat, staring blankly out the smudged window. I let a thin line of saliva pool in the corner of my mouth, wiping it away with a trembling, confused hand. "Look at him," Andre whispered to Brenda, leaning forward over the center console. "He is practically a vegetable already. Davis will not even have to write a convincing report. The old man is doing all the heavy lifting for us. Just make sure Davis signs the legal conservatorship papers today," Brenda hissed back, her eyes darting nervously toward the taxi driver. "I am not spending another night in that house waiting for Hector thugs to throw a firebomb through my living room window. Once we have the legal authority, we call the developers and we sell the dirt by sunset." I listened to every single word, cataloging their vicious, premeditated crimes. We pulled into a run-down, decaying strip mall on the absolute edge of the Houston Medical District. It was not a place of healing, but a miserable, desperate corner where corrupt doctors hid from the state medical board. The taxi lurched to a halt, and Andre practically dragged me out by the collar of my oversized, filthy shirt. "Keep moving, old man," Andre barked, shoving me toward a heavy glass door with peeling, faded lettering. "Dr. Lawrence Davis. Psychiatry and wellness," the sign falsely proclaimed. I shuffled my feet, taking tiny, agonizingly slow steps across the hot pavement. I let my shoulders droop, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on my taped-up shoes. We walked into the waiting room, and a wave of stale air conditioning hit my face, carrying the foul, heavy scent of cheap bleach and old sweat. The room was incredibly depressing, featuring cracked vinyl chairs and a flickering fluorescent light tube that buzzed like a dying insect. Behind a thick, scratched plexiglass window, a bored receptionist chewed loudly on a piece of bright pink gum, completely ignoring our arrival. Andre marched right up to the glass, slapping his soft palm against the barrier. "We have an urgent appointment with Dr. Davis," Andre demanded, puffing out his chest, trying desperately to project a wealthy authority he no longer possessed. "My name is Andre, and he is expecting me." The receptionist barely glanced up from her glowing smartphone, slowly sliding a cheap plastic clipboard through a small slot in the glass. "Fill it out," she muttered, popping a large bubble of gum. "He is with a patient, so sit down and wait." Brenda grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging painfully into my skin. "Sit in that chair, Isaiah," she commanded, shoving me violently toward a plastic seat in the far corner of the miserable room. "Do not speak to anyone. Do not wander off. And for the love of God, stop looking so pathetic." I collapsed into the hard plastic chair, letting my arms dangle limply at my sides. I began to rock slightly back and forth, muttering absolute nonsense under my breath, perfectly executing the role of a terrified, helpless elder. I stared blankly at a faded poster on the opposite wall, but my sharp, highly trained eyes were scanning every single inch of the clinic. I noted the single hallway leading to the private examination rooms, counting the locked doors, establishing the tactical layout of my immediate environment. Andre and Brenda sat a few chairs away, completely ignoring my existence, speaking in hushed, frantic tones. "Did you bring the cash for the bribe?" Brenda asked, her eyes darting around the empty waiting room. "I pawned my custom golf clubs this morning," Andre whispered back, patting a noticeable bulge in his suit jacket pocket. "I have exactly $5,000 to give Davis. It is enough to cover his immediate gambling debt, and it buys us the heavy sedatives we need to completely incapacitate the old fool." I rocked a little faster, letting a soft, pathetic whimper escape my lips. They thought $5,000 was going to save their miserable lives. They thought a corrupt, gambling-addicted doctor was their ultimate salvation. But I already knew everything about Dr. Lawrence Davis. My brilliant private investigator Vance had sent me the complete devastating file on this pathetic excuse for a medical professional. Davis was in debt to the exact same violent underground syndicate as Andre, but his outstanding balance was significantly higher. Suddenly, the heavy wooden door leading to the back hallway clicked open. A small, nervous-looking man, wearing a wrinkled white coat, stepped into the waiting room. He had dark, heavy bags under his bloodshot eyes, and his hands trembled slightly as he held a manila folder. This was the man who was supposed to legally erase my brother trading his medical license for a quick, dirty payoff. Andre Dr. Davis called out, his voice cracking slightly with nervous exhaustion. "Bring him back to examination room B. Let us get this over with quickly." Andre stood up, a massive, sickening grin of relief washing over his pale face. "Get up, Isaiah," Andre ordered, grabbing my shoulder and hauling me to my feet. "It is time for your medicine, old man." I dragged my feet, whimpering softly, letting them push me down the narrow, dimly lit hallway. I was walking directly into their medical trap, playing the helpless, drooling prey. But the second that heavy examination door clicked shut, the pathetic old man was going to vanish, and the absolute nightmare of Dr. Lawrence Davis was going to officially begin. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, sealing me inside the small, soundproof room with the corrupt psychiatrist. I sat on the edge of the examination table, letting my head droop, continuing my soft, pathetic whimpering. I listened closely to the heavy footsteps of my son-in-law fading away down the linoleum hallway. We were completely alone, completely isolated from their frantic, desperate panic. "Doctor," Davis let out a long, heavy sigh of pure exhaustion. He walked over to a locked metal cabinet, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled out a small glass vial and a large, intimidating syringe. It was the chemical cocktail, the heavy mind-altering sedatives they planned to use to permanently erase my sweet brother. "Roll up your sleeve, Isaiah," Dr. Davis ordered, his voice dripping with tired, callous indifference. He tapped the side of the plastic syringe, pushing a tiny squirt of clear liquid into the stagnant air. "This is going to make you very sleepy, old man, and then you will not have to worry about a single thing ever again." He turned around, holding the needle up to the harsh fluorescent light, completely unprepared for the reality of the man sitting behind him. I stopped rocking. I closed my mouth, swallowing the fake saliva, and let my face completely harden into a mask of pure, lethal stone. I did not roll up my sleeve, and I did not whimper. I planted my heavy boots firmly on the linoleum floor and stood up to my absolute full height. My broad shoulders blocked out the glaring overhead light, casting a massive dark shadow directly over the tiny, corrupt doctor. Dr. Davis spun around, his bloodshot eyes widening in absolute shock as he looked up at the towering, imposing figure standing inches from his face. The pathetic, broken elder was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating force of pure devastation. "What are you doing?" Dr. Davis stammered, taking a clumsy step backward, bumping hard into the metal counter. "Sit back down, Isaiah, or I will call your family in here right now." I reached out with blinding, explosive speed. My large hand clamped directly around his wrist, my fingers locking around his fragile bones like a massive steel vise. I did not just hold his arm, I crushed it, applying a precise, agonizing pressure that made him instantly drop the heavy syringe. The needle clattered loudly against the floor, rolling harmlessly away under the examination table. "My name is not Isaiah," I whispered, my voice dropping to a low, terrifying rumble that shook the air between us. "And you are not going to inject me with anything, Lawrence?" Dr. Davis gasped, his face draining of all color, his knees buckling slightly under my crushing grip. "Let me go," he whimpered, absolute terror replacing his tired arrogance. "You are hurting me. Please let go of my wrist." I leaned in close, bringing my face just inches from his sweating forehead. "I know exactly who you are, Lawrence," I said, my tone completely devoid of any mercy. "I know about your failing medical practice, and I know about the disgusting fake prescriptions you write for cash. But most importantly, I know about the underground poker tables at the shipping channel. I know exactly how much money you owe to Hector Lawrence, and I know you are in far more danger than Andre could ever possibly understand." Dr. Davis completely froze his breathing, completely stopping in his chest. "How do you know that name?" He choked out, sheer panic filling his watery eyes. "Who are you?" "I am the man who holds your entire pathetic life in the palm of my hand," I stated, twisting his wrist just a fraction of an inch, making him gasp in sudden pain. "Andre gave you $5,000 to destroy my family today. But Hector wants $250,000 from you by tomorrow night, does he not, Lawrence? $5,000 is not going to save your legs from being shattered by his violent enforcers." "Please," Dr. Davis begged, tears of absolute fear welling up in his eyes. "I had no choice. I'm completely desperate. They are going to kill me." "I'm going to give you a choice right now," I commanded, letting go of his bruised wrist, stepping back to block the only exit. "You're going to sit down at that desk, Lawrence, and you are going to write a comprehensive, legally binding medical evaluation. You are going to state clearly and professionally that I am in perfect physical health and my mental capacity is absolute perfection. You are going to completely deny the conservatorship and declare me entirely competent to handle my own financial estate." "But Andre will kill me," Dr. Davis sobbed, rubbing his throbbing arm. "He paid me for the exact opposite. If you do not write that clean bill of health right now," I promised, my voice cutting through the room like a razor, "I will make one phone call to the state medical board and you will lose your license by noon. Then I will make a second phone call directly to Hector and I will tell him exactly where you are hiding your secret offshore accounts. You can choose to face Andre, a soft, pathetic coward, or you can choose to face me. Decide right now." Dr. Davis looked at the dropped syringe, and then he looked up at my cold, unblinking eyes. He realized instantly that he was trapped in a room with a predator far more dangerous than any mob boss. He scrambled frantically toward the small desk, his hands shaking violently as he pulled out a stack of official state-mandated legal forms. "I will do it," Dr. Davis cried, picking up a heavy black pen. "I will sign whatever you want. Just please do not call them. I am begging you. Make it airtight. Lawrence," I instructed, watching him scribble frantically across the thick paper. "Stamp it with your official medical seal and sign it clearly. If a single lawyer can poke a hole in this document, I will personally come back here and finish the job Hector started." He stamped the paper twice, his breathing ragged and shallow, practically tearing the form as he pushed it across the metal desk toward me. I picked up the document, scanning the legal text with my highly trained eyes. It was absolutely perfect. It completely destroyed their evil plot, stripping them of any legal right to steal the $5 million property. I folded the paper neatly, tucking it deep into the pocket of my oversized stained trousers. I let my shoulders slump forward again, dropping my head instantly, transforming back into the frail, broken old man they thought I was. Now I whispered, keeping my eyes fixed on his terrified face, "Open that door, Lawrence, and tell my loving family the wonderful news." Dr. Davis reached out with a trembling hand, grabbing the heavy brass handle of the examination room door. He pulled it open, his face completely pale, his white coat stained with cold sweat. I shuffled closely behind him, keeping my head bowed down. My shoulders hunched forward in a perfect display of a broken elder. Andre and Brenda were waiting right outside in the narrow hallway, their faces lighting up with a sickening, greedy anticipation. "Well," Andre demanded, stepping forward eagerly, his hand reaching into his pocket where the bribe money was kept. "Is the paperwork completely signed, Doctor? Did you give him the heavy sedatives?" Dr. Davis swallowed hard, his eyes darting from Andre to my hunched figure and back to Andre again. He cleared his throat, his voice cracking under the immense pressure of the deadly threat I had just placed on his life. "Mr. Robinson is in absolute perfect health," Dr. Davis announced, his words falling like heavy anvils in the quiet clinic. "I've conducted a thorough examination, and his mental capacity is entirely pristine. There is absolutely no medical justification for a conservatorship, and I have signed a legally binding document stating exactly that." Brenda gasped, her manicured hand flying up to cover her mouth. "What are you talking about?" Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing down the sterile hallway. "You told us he was sick. You told us you were going to handle this." Andre stepped aggressively toward the small doctor, his face turning a dark, dangerous shade of red. "Listen to me, Lawrence," Andre hissed, grabbing the collar of the doctor's white coat. "We had an arrangement. I brought you the $5,000, so you better rewrite that evaluation right now, or I will completely ruin you." Dr. Davis flinched, but the sheer terror of my previous threat completely overpowered his fear of the cowardly son-in-law. "Get your hands off me," Dr. Davis yelled, pushing Andre backward with a sudden, desperate burst of energy. "I will not compromise my medical license for your petty family squabbles. Take your father-in-law and get out of my clinic immediately before I call the police." Dr. Davis practically ran back into the examination room, slamming the heavy wooden door shut, the loud click of the deadbolt echoing loudly. Andre stood there completely frozen, his fists clenched tight at his sides. The medical loophole was entirely closed, the bribe had completely failed, and the $5 million property was still slipping right through his greasy fingers. "Let us go," Brenda whispered, her face completely drained of color, grabbing Andre tightly by the arm. "People are staring at us, Andre." We walked back out into the brutal, suffocating Houston heat, piling silently into another cheap taxicab. The ride back to the neighborhood was incredibly tense, filled with a dark, suffocating panic. The clock was ticking down to midnight, the mob was sharpening their knives, and the greedy family was entirely out of options. I sat in the back seat, staring blankly out the smudged window, letting a small trickle of fake saliva pool at the corner of my mouth. I watched their reflections in the glass, seeing the absolute desperation completely taking over their minds. "We cannot wait for a judge," Andre muttered, biting down on his fingernails, his leg bouncing nervously against the taxi door. "The legal route is totally dead, Brenda. Hector and his violent men are going to show up tonight, and they are going to burn us alive. We need the signature on the deed right now." Brenda stared straight ahead, her eyes wide, her mind racing through every single manipulative tactic she had ever learned. She was completely cornered, but toxic people are incredibly dangerous when they are backed against a wall. A slow, cruel smile began to creep across her heavily made-up face. "If we cannot force him medically," Brenda whispered, her voice dripping with pure, concentrated venom, "then we force him publicly." Andre stopped chewing his nails, looking at his wife with a confused, desperate expression. "What are you talking about?" Andre asked. "We throw a party," Brenda announced, her eyes gleaming with a manic evil light. "A massive, beautiful party for our 40th wedding anniversary. We invite the entire neighborhood, Andre. We invite the pastor from the church, the deacons, and every single person who thinks I'm a saint for taking care of this pathetic old man." Andre shook his head, completely lost. "How does a party get us the $5 million, Brenda?" Because Isaiah is a weak, cowardly people-pleaser, Brenda explained, pointing a sharp finger toward the back seat where I was pretending to be entirely deaf. He hates causing a scene, Andre. He hates public embarrassment more than anything in the world. We set up a stage, we gather a massive crowd, and I give a beautiful, tearful speech about my endless devotion to him. Then right in front of the pastor and all our friends, I hand him the pen and the property deed. Brenda laughed, a high, wicked sound that sent chills down my spine. I will tell the crowd it is a romantic gift, Brenda continued. I will tell them he is transferring the estate to secure our family legacy. If he refuses to sign it in front of 100 cheering people, he will look like a completely ungrateful, cruel monster. The social pressure will absolutely crush him. He will sign the paper just to make the crowd stop staring. Andre's eyes lit up, a massive wave of relief washing over his sweating face. It is brilliant. Andre breathed out, a greedy smirk returning to his lips. We invite my boss too. We invite the commercial developers. We show them the signature live and they wire the money before the party is even over. We pay Hector tonight and we are completely free. I slouched lower against the sticky vinyl seat, letting out a soft, confused groan. They actually thought a backyard party was going to save them. They were planning to build a massive, public stage, inviting all their friends and associates to watch my total destruction. But they had no idea that they were actually just building the perfect platform for their own spectacular execution. The cheap taxi pulled into the driveway, tires crunching over the broken glass that still littered the hot concrete. Andre rushed out first, completely ignoring the destroyed luxury car, his mind entirely focused on his desperate public trap. Brenda climbed out next, smoothing her expensive skirt, taking a deep breath of the humid Houston air. I shuffled out slowly, keeping my head bowed, playing the exhausted, confused elder to absolute perfection. We walked into the quiet house and Brenda immediately shifted her entire personality. The cruel, screaming warden was completely gone, replaced by a sickeningly sweet, devoted wife. She walked over to me, placing her manicured hands gently on my shoulders, looking deep into my eyes with a manufactured, terrifying warmth. Isaiah, honey. Brenda cooed, her voice soft and entirely fake. I know this morning was incredibly stressful for you, and I'm so sorry we had to go to that awful clinic. I looked up at her, letting my eyes widen with a pathetic, desperate hope. I am sorry too, Brenda. I whispered, my voice trembling with artificial emotion. I just want everything to be peaceful again. I do not like it when everyone is yelling. Brenda smiled, a predatory, victorious grin that did not reach her cold eyes. That is exactly what I want too, Isaiah, she said, stroking my arm with a chilling affection. We've been married for 40 years, and we have let all this silly money business get in the way of our beautiful love. I think we need to celebrate our family and remind everyone how much we truly care about each other. A celebration, I asked, tilting my head like a confused, eager child. Yes, Brenda nodded, her excitement building rapidly. A massive anniversary party right here in our own backyard tonight. We will invite the pastor, all our wonderful neighbors, and even Andre Boss from the real estate firm. We will have beautiful music and a huge cake, and we can show the entire world that our family is completely united. I let a massive, goofy smile spread across my face, perfectly matching the gullible, naive persona of my sweet twin brother. That sounds wonderful, Brenda, I said, clapping my hands together weakly. A big party with all our friends. Brenda leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, loving whisper. And during the party, Isaiah, I want you to do something incredibly special for me. I want you to make a grand gesture right in front of the pastor and all our guests. I want you to sign this property deed over to our family trust as a romantic gift to secure our future together forever. I nodded vigorously, my head bobbing up and down in absolute blind obedience. Oh yes, Brenda, I agreed eagerly. I will sign whatever you want me to sign. I just want to give you a beautiful gift and make you happy. Brenda exhaled a massive, shaky breath, her eyes flashing with pure, unadulterated triumph. She thought she had completely won. She thought she had manipulated the broken old man into handing over a $5 million fortune simply by offering him a slice of cake and a fake smile. "Oh, Isaiah, you are such a wonderful husband," Brenda beamed, patting my cheek with a patronizing heavy hand. "Now you just go sit on the sofa and rest your mind. Andre and I have a tremendous amount of work to do." I shuffled over to the worn leather couch, sitting down heavily, keeping my massive grin firmly in place. Inside my chest, a cold, dark laughter echoed loudly. The trap was officially set, and they were the ones who had proudly built the cage. Andre was already pacing the kitchen, his smartphone pressed tightly against his ear, barking frantic orders to. He called the high-end party rental company, begging them to deliver a white tent and 50 chairs immediately. He promised to pay them double in cash using the very last bills from his pawned golf clubs. He called his wealthy boss, the lead commercial developer, practically begging him to attend the backyard gathering. "I have the signature guaranteed." Sir Andre lied smoothly into the phone, his voice dripping with desperate arrogance. "He is signing the property deed tonight in front of 50 witnesses. Bring the wire transfer authorization and we can close the $5 million deal right by the barbecue grill." I watched them scramble, absolutely frantic, rushing to organize their own spectacular downfall. Kendra came downstairs, completely confused by the sudden flurry of activity, but Brenda quickly pulled her aside. They whispered in the corner of the dining room, their eyes darting over toward my hunched, pathetic figure. They were explaining the vicious public trap, bringing the spoiled daughter into the massive final heist. I closed my eyes, resting my head against the back of the sofa, breathing in the suffocating, tense air of the Houston house. The stage was being constructed, the audience was being gathered, and the actors were desperately rehearsing their final greedy lines. But I was the one writing the ending to this twisted play, and my script called for absolute total devastation. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly on the Houston suburbs, turning the cracked concrete into a sweltering oven. I sat perfectly still on the worn leather sofa, watching the chaotic flurry of activity through the large glass patio doors. Andre was outside in the oppressive heat, waving his arms, frantically barking desperate orders at a crew of sweaty men setting up a massive white event tent. Brenda was right beside him, pointing a manicured finger at a stack of folding chairs, her face pinched with a frantic, greedy anxiety. They were entirely consumed by their grand public trap, completely ignoring the quiet interior of the house. That was exactly when my supposed daughter Kendra made her stealthy, treacherous move. She crept down the wooden staircase, her footsteps unusually soft, lacking their normal entitled stomp. She paused at the bottom step, her eyes darting nervously toward the glass doors, making absolutely sure her mother and her husband were completely distracted outside in the heavy humidity. She clutched a sleek blue paper folder tightly against her chest, holding it like a shield or perhaps a hidden weapon. Kendra walked over to the sofa, sitting down right next to me, bringing a heavy wave of expensive floral perfume that poorly masked the scent of her own cold sweat. She did not yell at me to wash her car, and she did not complain about my smell. Instead, she leaned in incredibly close, her face pale and drawn, her eyes would tell you with a frantic, selfish panic. Daddy, Kendra whispered, her voice barely louder than the hum of the overworked air conditioner. "We need to talk right now, and you need to listen to me very carefully because I am the only person in this family who actually cares about you." I almost let out a dark, bitter laugh, but I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek, maintaining my blank, confused expression. This was the exact same girl who had demanded I sell my only truck, the girl who had cried over a canceled credit card while I was supposedly starving on a concrete floor. I turned my head slowly, looking at her with wide, innocent eyes. "What is it, Princess?" I asked, letting my voice crack with a pathetic, elderly tremble. "Are you okay? You look very frightened." I am terrified, Daddy Kendra lied, smoothly reaching out to grasp my large, calloused hand with her soft, manicured fingers. Andre is completely out of his mind. I heard him talking on his cell phone earlier when he thought I was crying in my bedroom. He is in massive trouble with some extremely dangerous men downtown, and he owes them hundreds of thousands of dollars. I let out a soft, dramatic gasp, playing the terrified old man to absolute perfection. Oh my goodness, Kendra. I whimpered, pulling my hand back slightly. That sounds awful. It is worse than awful, Daddy Kendra hissed, leaning even closer, her eyes flashing with pure, unadulterated greed. He knows this house is worth $5 million to the commercial developers. He's planning to make you sign the property deed over to him and Mom tonight at the massive party. But as soon as the massive wire transfer hits his bank account, he's going to pay off the violent mobsters and then he's going to run away. He's going to leave me, Daddy. He's going to leave Mom completely bankrupt and they are going to put you in a miserable state facility. I stared at her, feeling a cold, heavy disgust settling deep into my stomach. She knew the absolute truth. She knew her husband was a desperate criminal. She knew her mother was a willing accomplice, and she knew they were planning to steal my brother's entire life savings. But her primary instinct was not to protect her gentle father. Her only instinct was to hijack the massive heist and steal the $5 million entirely for herself. What should we do, Kendra? I asked, letting my lower lip quiver pathetically. I do not want them to take the house, and I do not want you to be left all alone. Kendra smiled a sharp, predatory grin that looked exactly like a starving shark smelling fresh blood in the water. She opened the blue folder, pulling out a crisp, freshly printed legal document. It was a transfer of deed, meticulously typed, completely bypassing Brenda and Andre. You have to trust me, Daddy, Kendra urged, tapping her polished fingernail against the signature line. I am your only flesh and blood child. During the party tonight, when Mom hands you the pen to sign her fake document, you just pull this paper out instead. You sign the house directly over to me, and only to me. Just to you, I repeated, making my voice sound incredibly small and confused. Yes. Kendra nodded vigorously, her eyes burning with a desperate, toxic ambition. If the property is entirely in my name, Andre cannot touch a single penny. I will instantly divorce him. I will kick Mom out of the master bedroom, and I will take complete care of you. We will sell the dirt to the wealthy developers, and we will be incredibly rich, just you and me. I promise I will never let them lock you in that basement ever again. I looked down at the forged legal paper, reading the absolute betrayal printed in bold black ink. She was incredibly willing to throw her own mother onto the street, and she was perfectly happy to manipulate her senile father, all for a massive payday. She was truly the worst of them all, a parasite feeding on the absolute bottom of the barrel. Okay, princess, I whispered, looking back up at her with a soft, compliant smile. I will do exactly what you say. Give me the paper and I will hide it in my pocket for the party tonight. Kendra exhaled a massive, shaky breath, her face lighting up with a sickening, victorious joy. She shoved the forged document into my large hands, squeezing my fingers with a cold, fake affection. Thank you, Daddy, she whispered eagerly. You are doing the right thing, I absolutely promise. She quickly stood up, grabbing her empty blue folder, and hurried back toward the staircase before Brenda could catch her conspiring. I watched her walk away, folding the treacherous document, neatly sliding it deep into my pocket, right next to the clean bill of health from Dr. Davis. The absolute depravity of this family was truly staggering. They were a den of venomous snakes, actively turning on each other, entirely blinded by the promise of $5 million. But the stage was almost fully set, and the grand explosive finale was only a few short hours away. I waited until Kendra's footsteps completely faded away on the second floor. The house was entirely consumed by a frantic, suffocating panic, giving me the perfect opportunity to make my final preparations. I stood up from the worn leather sofa, shuffling my taped-up shoes across the hardwood floor, heading straight for the basement door. Brenda was standing in the kitchen, furiously polishing a silver platter, her face covered in a thick layer of expensive makeup. "Get down in your hole, Isaiah," Brenda snapped, not even bothering to look at me. "Do not come up until I send Andre to get you. The pastor and the developers will be here in exactly 2 hours, so try to make yourself look presentable for once in your miserable life." I nodded slowly, keeping my head bowed in total submission. "Yes, Brenda," I whispered, pulling the heavy wooden door open. I stepped into the dark, cold stairwell, pulling the door shut behind me, sliding the deadbolt securely into place. I walked down the creaking steps, but I did not sit on the filthy, mildew-stained mattress. I walked directly to the broken window, hoisted my large frame up, and slipped silently out into the overgrown, sweltering Houston backyard. I moved like a ghost through the thick, humid air, slipping through the broken wooden fence and walking rapidly down the cracked concrete alleyway. I reached into my pocket, pressing the speed dial on my encrypted satellite phone. Within 3 minutes, the massive pitch-black Cadillac Escalade rolled smoothly around the corner, waiting for me at the edge of the neighborhood. I climbed into the heavily tinted air-conditioned cabin, wiping a bead of sweat from my forehead. "Take me to the Galleria district," I commanded the driver, my deep voice rumbling with absolute authority. "Take me to the most expensive menswear boutique in the entire city, and do not stop for red lights." The heavy vehicle surged forward, weaving expertly through the dense Houston traffic. I stared out the dark window, my mind perfectly calculating every single step of the impending execution. Andre and Brenda thought they were building a grand public stage to humiliate a broken old man. They thought a backyard party was going to save them from the violent underground mob. They had no idea that they were actively assembling the exact audience I needed to broadcast their spectacular, absolute ruin. The Escalade pulled up to a pristine, glass-fronted boutique located in the wealthiest commercial sector of the city. I stepped out onto the pristine sidewalk, wearing my oversized, heavily stained trousers and a ripped flannel shirt that smelled like damp earth. I pushed open the heavy glass doors, stepping into a showroom filled with polished marble floors and racks of incredibly expensive custom-tailored clothing. A young salesman wearing a sharp navy blazer and a perfectly groomed haircut immediately stepped into my path. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust, looking at me like I was a piece of garbage that had blown in from the street. "Excuse me," the salesman said, his voice dripping with absolute contempt. "The public restrooms are located 3 blocks down the street, sir. You absolutely cannot be in here. You are ruining the atmosphere for our actual clients." I did not raise my voice, and I did not flinch. I simply lifted a large, calloused hand, pointing a thick finger toward a mannequin standing in the center of the pristine room. "I want that exact charcoal gray suit." I stated my tone, entirely flat and commanding. "I want a crisp white silk shirt, a subtle black tie, and a pair of polished leather Oxfords." The salesman let out a short, arrogant laugh, completely dismissing my heavy, imposing presence. "That is a hand-stitched, imported Italian wool suit," he sneered, crossing his arms over his narrow chest. "It costs over $4,000, old man. I'm going to ask you to leave right now before I'm forced to call the building security." I did not argue with the pathetic, arrogant boy. I simply reached into the deep pocket of my ruined trousers, pulling out a solid black titanium credit card. It was a completely exclusive, limitless Centurion card, a financial weapon that very few men on Earth possessed. I held the heavy metal card up to his face, letting the pristine showroom lights catch the silver engraved numbers. The salesman stopped laughing instantly. The color drained entirely from his smug face, his eyes widening in absolute terrified shock. He recognized the heavy black metal, and he suddenly realized that the filthy old man standing in front of him could easily buy the entire boutique with a single swipe. "I'm so sorry, sir," The salesman stammered, his entire demeanor flipping into a pathetic, desperate panic. "Right this way, sir. Let me get my measuring tape and I will bring you a glass of our finest aged scotch." "Bring the bottle," I replied, walking past him toward the expansive, velvet-lined fitting rooms. An hour later, I stepped back out into the sweltering Houston heat. The oversized, smelly rags were left in a plastic trash bag on the boutique floor. I was wearing the charcoal gray armor. The Italian wool fit my massive shoulders perfectly. The silk shirt felt cool against my skin, and the polished Oxfords clicked with absolute heavy authority against the concrete sidewalk. I purchased a thick, solid gold watch, fastening it securely around my wrist. The broken, hunched elder was completely dead. The lethal, calculated military contractor had officially returned to the surface. I climbed back into the waiting Escalade carrying a sleek black leather briefcase. "Take me back to the alleyway," I instructed, opening the briefcase on the leather seat next to me. Inside the case was a highly advanced, compact audio transmitter. I pulled out my encrypted burner phone, syncing the digital files directly to the transmitter. I had the arrogant, terrifying confession of Andre plotting to steal the $5 million and abandon his family. I had the frantic, murderous recording of Brenda begging the corrupt doctor to chemically lobotomize her own husband. I had every single piece of audio evidence locked, loaded, and completely ready to deploy. The Escalade dropped me off at the end of the cracked alleyway, exactly as the Houston sun began to dip below the tree line, casting long, bloody shadows across the neighborhood. The backyard was completely transformed. A massive white tent dominated the lawn, filled with folding chairs, a large wooden stage, and the loud, obnoxious chatter of 50 arriving guests. I slipped quietly through the broken fence, avoiding the busy caterers carrying trays of expensive food. I climbed back through the tiny basement window, dropping silently onto the cold concrete floor. I stood in the absolute dark, listening to the heavy footsteps of the wealthy guests gathering directly above my head. I brushed a small piece of dust off my charcoal lapel, adjusting my silk tie with steady, calm fingers. I was completely dressed for a funeral. All I had to do now was wait for Brenda to call me up to the absolute slaughter. The heavy wooden door at the top of the basement stairs groaned open, letting a harsh slice of yellow light pierce the absolute darkness. Isaiah Andre shouted, his voice echoing down the wooden steps, thick with a fake, forced cheerfulness. "Come on up here, old man. It is time for your big moment. Do not keep the guests waiting." I heard Andre walk away, his heavy footsteps retreating toward the backyard. He did not even bother to look down into the dark, completely assuming the broken elder was simply going to shuffle up the stairs on command. I stood in the shadows, adjusting the crisp cuffs of my pristine white silk shirt, feeling the cold, heavy weight of the gold watch on my wrist. I took a deep, steady breath of the damp air and began my ascent. My polished leather Oxfords hit the wooden steps with a heavy, deliberate rhythm. It was not the shuffling, pathetic scrape of a defeated man. It was the measured, lethal march of an executioner stepping up to the gallows. I reached the top landing, walking through the empty, chaotic kitchen, and stepped right out through the sliding glass patio doors. The sweltering Houston heat hit me instantly, completely saturated with the heavy scent of expensive catered barbecue and cheap floral perfume. The massive white tent was absolutely packed. 50 people were crammed into the backyard holding sweating glasses of iced tea and cheap champagne. I saw the local pastor standing near the buffet table nodding his head at a joke. I saw Mr. Henderson, the massive, red-faced commercial developer, standing near the back, checking his expensive watch with obvious greedy impatience. And then there was Brenda. She was standing on a small elevated wooden riser at the front of the tent, holding a wireless microphone. Andre stood right next to her, puffing his chest out, completely blind to the absolute storm bearing down on him. Kendra hovered near the edge of the stage, clutching her blue folder, her eyes darting nervously through the massive crowd. I stepped off the concrete patio, walking directly onto the manicured grass. The late afternoon sun caught the pristine charcoal gray Italian wool of my custom suit. A neighbor standing near the door gasped softly, spilling a drop of her drink onto the grass. The crowd slowly began to part, a silent, rippling wave of absolute shock spreading through the entire tent. They were expecting a shuffling, pathetic charity case. They got a towering, broad-shouldered titan walking with the posture of a four-star general. Brenda tapped the microphone, the sharp electronic whine cutting through the loud chatter. "Thank you all for coming," Brenda announced, her voice trembling with a perfectly rehearsed, sickening emotion. "Today we celebrate 40 years of marriage. We celebrate a lifetime of love, sacrifice, and absolute devotion." She wiped a completely fake tear from her heavily powdered cheek, looking out at the silent crowd. "It has not always been easy," Brenda continued, placing a dramatic hand over her heart. "But my sweet husband Isaiah has always been my absolute rock, and tonight, to secure our beautiful family legacy, he has decided to make a grand romantic gesture." Brenda turned toward the crowd, extending her manicured hand toward the back of the tent. "Come on up here, honey," she cooed softly. Her eyes finally landed on me, standing right in the middle of the parted sea of guests. The fake loving smile completely froze on her face. Her jaw dropped open, her eyes widening in absolute terrified confusion. She looked at the $4,000 suit, she looked at the heavy gold watch, and she looked at the cold, unblinking steel in my eyes. Andre dropped his plastic cup of champagne. It hit the grass with a dull thud, the expensive liquid soaking into the dirt. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, completely unable to process the towering, immaculate figure standing in his backyard. I did not stop walking. I took the wooden steps of the riser, my leather shoes clicking loudly against the hollow boards. I stood right next to Brenda, towering over her, looking out at the sea of confused, completely silent faces. Isaiah Brenda whispered, her voice a tiny, frantic hiss that the microphone barely caught. "Where did you get those clothes? What are you doing?" I ignored her completely. I looked down at the small wooden podium sitting on the stage. Resting right on top was a thick leather-bound portfolio open to a crisp, newly printed legal document. It was the absolute transfer of deed, signing the $5 million property directly over to Brenda and Andre. Next to the treacherous paper sat a heavy gold-plated pen. "Sign it right now," Andre hissed, stepping close to my shoulder, his breath smelling of stale alcohol and pure, unadulterated panic. "Just sign the paper, old man. Do not make a stupid scene." I looked at Andre, letting a tiny, terrifying smile touch the absolute corners of my mouth. I reached out with a steady, massive hand, picking up the heavy gold pen. The entire crowd leaned forward, holding their collective breath, waiting for the romantic grand gesture Brenda had just promised them. Kendra took a desperate step forward, her eyes silently begging me to pull her forged document out of my tailored pocket instead. I held the pen over the signature line, feeling the immense, crushing weight of their collective greed pressing down on me. They thought they had entirely won. They thought the pressure of the pastor, the neighbors, and the wealthy developer would absolutely force me to bend the knee. But I did not bend. I slowly turned my hand, dropping the heavy gold pen. It clattered loudly against the wooden podium, rolling right off the edge, falling completely out of sight. I reached over gently, but firmly, prying the wireless microphone out of Brenda's cold, shaking fingers. "I am not going to sign that paper, Brenda," I said. My deep, booming voice echoing like thunder through the massive white tent. "Because this is not a romantic gift. This is a $5 million heist, and I am officially shutting it down." The crowd gasped, a collective sound of pure shock rippling through the sweltering Houston heat. Brenda lunged for the microphone, her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate terror. "Give it back, Isaiah!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking under the sudden immense pressure. "He is confused, everyone. He is having a terrible medical episode." I did not move an inch. I simply raised my free hand, planting my large, calloused palm firmly against her shoulder. Stopping her dead in her tracks. I am not confused, Brenda, I said, my deep voice rumbling over the massive speakers carrying a cold, undeniable authority. I have never been more clear-headed in my entire life. I turned my back on my trembling sister-in-law, looking directly out at the sea of stunned, silent faces. I saw the pastor standing near the buffet table, his mouth hanging completely open. I saw Mrs. Higgins, the sweet neighbor who used to bake my brother cookies, clutching her chest in absolute horror. "Welcome to our beautiful anniversary party," I announced, pacing slowly across the wooden stage, letting the expensive Italian wool of my custom suit catch the late afternoon sun. "My wife just told you a very touching story about our 40 years of love and our incredible family sacrifice, but I think it is time I told you the absolute unvarnished truth about how this family actually treats their beloved patriarch." Andre stepped forward, his face flushed with a dark, violent rage. "Shut your mouth, old man," Andre roared, practically spitting in his absolute fury. "Turn the sound system off. Somebody cut the power right now." Nobody moved. The crowd was completely paralyzed, entirely captivated by the towering, immaculate man holding the microphone. For the past 5 years, I continued my voice cutting through the humid air. Like a sharp, heavy blade, I have lived in this very house. But I do not sleep in the master bedroom, and I do not sleep in the guest room. I pointed a thick, steady finger toward the back of the house. "I sleep in the unfinished basement," I stated, letting the horrifying reality sink deep into the quiet crowd. "I sleep on a filthy, mildew-stained mattress directly on the freezing concrete floor. I do not have a bathroom. I have a plastic bucket. I do not get to eat the expensive steaks my son-in-law buys with my stolen pension. I get a cracked, dirty dog bowl filled with cold leftover scraps, tossed onto the kitchen floor for me to eat on my hands and knees." A loud, collective murmur of disgust swept through the white tent. Mrs. Higgins covered her mouth, tears instantly welling up in her kind eyes. "That is a massive lie," Brenda screamed, pointing a shaking, manicured finger at my chest. "We take perfect care of him. He is completely senile. He hallucinates these terrible things." "If I'm so senile, Brenda," I asked, turning my head to look her dead in the eyes, "then why did you try to chemically lobotomize me at a corrupt clinic this morning?" Brenda physically recoiled, staggering backward as if I had just slapped her directly across the face. I reached into the inside pocket of my tailored jacket, pulling out the crisp, legally binding medical evaluation. I held the white paper high in the air, letting the Houston sun illuminate the official state-mandated medical seal. "This is a clean bill of health," I announced, my voice booming with a righteous, lethal fury. "Signed today by the exact same corrupt doctor you bribed to declare me incompetent. You wanted to pump my veins full of heavy sedatives just so you could steal my signature and throw me into a miserable state facility." Andre lunged forward, his absolute panic boiling over into a desperate physical violence. "Give me that paper, you crazy old fool," Andre shouted, reaching blindly for the medical document. I simply shifted my weight, using my broad shoulder to easily deflect his clumsy, pathetic attack. Andre stumbled awkwardly, crashing hard into the wooden podium, knocking the fake property deed directly onto the grass. "He is not crazy," a new sharp voice yelled from the side of the stage. I looked over, seeing Kendra standing there, clutching her blue folder, her face pale and completely desperate. She thought this was her perfect moment, her grand opportunity to hijack the massive heist. "He's telling the truth," Kendra cried, playing the innocent, horrified daughter for the massive crowd. "Andre is a terrible, violent man, and he is trying to steal everything." But Daddy Kendra pleaded, holding out her forged, treacherous document signed the estate over to me. "I will protect you from them. I will keep you entirely safe. Just sign this paper right now." The crowd gasped again, completely overwhelmed by the vicious, undeniable backstabbing happening right in front of their eyes. I looked at the forged paper in her trembling hand. And then I looked down at her greedy, toxic face. "You do not want to protect me, Kendra," I said, my voice dropping to a low, devastating rumble. "You just want the exact same $5 million that Andre wants. You were perfectly happy to watch me starve in that basement until you realized you could steal the massive commercial buyout for yourself." Mr. Henderson, the massive red-faced developer, suddenly pushed his way to the front of the crowd. His face was a mask of furious corporate confusion. "What buyout?" Mr. Henderson demanded, his loud voice cutting through the chaotic noise on the stage. "Andre, what exactly is going on here? You told me you had the clear title to this property today." I looked directly at the wealthy developer, the man holding the massive checkbook that had caused all this absolute misery. "He lied to you, Mr. Henderson," I stated, meeting his gaze with an unblinking, heavy stare. "He knew this single acre of dirt was the keystone lot for your massive $100 million shopping district. He knew you authorized a $5 million payout just to secure this exact location. He has been torturing me, starving me, and trying to murder me in my sleep just to forge my signature and steal your money to pay off his violent mob debts." Andre let out a high, terrified shriek, realizing his wealthy boss had just heard the absolute, undeniable truth. His career was completely dead, his massive payout was entirely gone, and the violent underground mob was still coming to collect their bloody debt. But the execution was not over. I reached back into my tailored pocket, pulling out my encrypted burner phone. I was ready to drop the absolute final hammer on their pathetic, ruined lives. I tapped the screen of my encrypted burner phone, syncing the digital audio files directly to the massive Bluetooth speakers sitting at the edge of the wooden stage. The loud party music instantly cut out, replaced by a sharp electronic hiss. I looked down at Andre, who was sweating profusely, his expensive silk shirt clinging to his trembling body. He looked like a trapped rat, desperately searching for a tiny hole to crawl into. "Listen closely, everyone," I commanded, my deep voice booming across the silent, shocked backyard. "Listen to the real man of the house, plotting the absolute destruction of his own family." I pressed the play button, and the clear, undeniable sound of a slurred, drunken voice echoed through the sweltering Houston heat. "It is not about the old man," the recorded voice of Andre sneered, sounding incredibly loud and arrogant. "It is about the dirt, Brenda. It is worth $5 million. Once he signs the paper, we get the massive payout." The crowd gasped again, a loud collective sound of pure horror. Mr. Henderson crossed his thick arms, glaring at his employee with a cold corporate fury. But the recording was not finished, and the absolute worst betrayal was still waiting in the dark. "And what about Kendra?" the recorded voice of Brenda asked. "Kendra is a complete idiot," the recorded voice of Andre laughed, a cruel, sickening sound that made the real Kendra physically stumble backward on the grass. "The second that massive wire transfer hits my bank account, I am absolutely gone. I filed the divorce papers 3 weeks ago, Brenda. I'm taking my half, and I'm moving to a tropical beach, leaving her with absolutely nothing." I stopped the audio playback, letting the heavy, suffocating silence fall over the 50 guests. I looked over at Kendra, my supposed daughter. The blue folder dropped from her trembling hands, the forged legal papers scattering across the green grass. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated devastation, realizing the husband she had bullied her own father to please was actively planning to discard her like actual garbage. "You massive liar!" Kendra shrieked, a high, piercing scream that shattered the quiet suburban afternoon. She did not run away, and she did not cry. She launched herself directly at Andre, completely fueled by a blind, entitled rage. She slammed into his chest, her expensive high heels digging into the dirt, her manicured nails raking viciously across his pale face. She tore at his silk shirt, screaming terrible, violent obscenities, completely humiliating herself in front of the entire neighborhood. "Get off me, you crazy witch!" Andre yelled, trying desperately to shield his bleeding face from her vicious, relentless attack. The wealthy guests scrambled backward, pulling out their smartphones instantly, recording the spectacular physical downfall of the Robinson family. But Brenda was not fighting. She was standing near the wooden podium, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes, realizing her own massive crimes were about to be broadcast to the world. "Isaiah, please," Brenda begged, tears of absolute panic streaming down her ruined makeup. "Turn that phone off. I will do whatever you want." "I am not Isaiah," I said quietly, though the microphone picked up every single cold syllable. "And I have one more recording for the pastor to hear." I pressed the button again, playing the frantic, evil whisper of Brenda from the kitchen, recorded just a few short hours ago. "If the old man just dies," the recorded voice of Brenda hissed, "the entire estate goes directly to you."